Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Robinson, founder of Capacity Partners, and I have with me Joan Schaefer, consultant with Capacity Partners, and Kathy Stevens, executive director for McHale, whom I think many of you know. And I see that we have some of our clients on with us. Great to see you, and welcome to those of you who are new to Capacity Partners. This is a 30-minute webinar. Go ahead and ask your Q&A and we will get to them at the very end. So let's dive right into it. We spent a lot of time putting together this particular presentation today, which is on dynamic planning in the time of COVID-19 and beyond. And that, it's just a time of unprecedented change. We've all heard that word unprecedented so many times, but there's really nothing else to say about it. And it requires a different kind of planning than the strategic planning that we've been doing and that you all have been doing for a while. So Joan, tell us a little bit more about what we're going to accomplish today.
Thanks, Mary. So in this webinar today, our goal is to, as Barry just suggested, introduce you to a new way of thinking about planning that we're calling dynamic planning. And we want to help you understand your organization through the lens of this planning approach and understand where you are now and where you might be in the future. Our goal is to help you deal in that vein with both the immediate realities and where you'll be in another several months, and then to provide you with actual tools for applying dynamic planning to your organization. So we know that there's enormous variability in the way that COVID-19 and social distancing is affecting all of us. We think that there's two real variables that help to define what that means. So one is the amount of revenue you've got, how much cash you've got on hand today, tomorrow, and in several months. And as we've called it, service demand, which has to do with, can you actually provide your services? Or people wanting more of them? Where are you and where will you be? And you could be like an organization that's lost most or all of its revenues, a theater where they have no ticket sales and they can't perform. You could be a disaster relief organization where, like a food bank, your demand has just exponentially exploded. Or you could be like many organizations, you're just kind of making do. Your demand hasn't really changed, your cash currently hasn't really changed, but you're trying to do all the old work in new ways. Regardless of where you are on this spectrum, we believe that dynamic planning can really help your organization move forward. Thank you.
So it's interesting, Joan, to just think about what category organizations are in. Again, I run an organization called McHale, the Montgomery Coalition for Adult English Literacy. And in that role, we support over 50 organizations in the county that provide English classes to immigrant adults. And so we are right now in that making do category. We've been able to maintain our service delivery, and that's stayed the same, if not increased. And we're in a fortunate situation as compared to many that our cash, at least through the end of the fiscal year, we're funded in large part through Montgomery County, a key partner of ours. So that has remained constant for us.
Thanks.
Well, that's really great, Kathy, and lucky that you're in that position. So for dynamic planning, let's start with the strategic planning framework. And this is our Capacity Partners framework, but I'm sure that all of you have done something very similar. We start with the foundation, which is your mission, vision, and values, and really need to stay constant pretty much throughout the lifetime of your organization. And then one takes a quick look at the current situation, looking internally and externally to find trends and themes as you then merge the two together to create your strategic direction, typically for the next 3 to 5 years, and then move ahead to implement that strategic direction. So it's primarily a sequential process, and it has worked very well for all of us in the past days. Now, what has happened? Well, the current situation has exploded due to COVID-19 in a way that has affected all of us around the globe, and certainly the nonprofits here in the DMV. And so because of this dramatic change in the current situation, the planning process has to change, which is why we're calling it dynamic planning. You will need to be looking very carefully externally, looking internally, and adjusting those plans really carefully. And if it looks kind of a little messy moving around, that's exactly what we anticipate happening. Not the elements of change so much, but the process.
And
So we've identified 4 stages of the dynamic planning. Number 1 is the crisis response plan. And then number 2 is monitoring what's happening, both internally, externally, and adjusting. And that's this slide I just talked about. 3 is then planning ahead and creating a dynamic plan. And then number 4 is moving into the transition. So Kathy, can you tell us a little bit at McHale, where are you guys right now? And what have been the elements that have been the most impactful for you?
Sure. I really think now, kind of 6 weeks into this, we are really in that monitoring stage 2, where we've designed and implemented response plan pretty quickly. We've now assessed that probably every week. Even in the first weeks, that was a daily assessment, building on what information we were gaining about how we were doing our work, what our clients needed, what the external kind of situation was. And so we're adjusting, but we have to adjust less frequently right now. And then we are starting, and I will be starting certainly with my board, to look to how do we move into that number 3 stage, the planning ahead, which we will get to in a little bit.
Okay, great. So what we'd like to do is stop for just a moment and take a poll and find out of all of our participants, what stage are you in? So let's take a moment and let us know if you're in stage 1 crisis, monitoring, planning ahead, or transition. And I'm going to look at the poll as it's coming in.
And obviously, it's unlikely any of you are in transition yet, because we don't seem to be going back to normal.
And of course, there's no right or wrong on this too,
That's
because
right.
different organizations with different needs and abilities are going to be in different places as well.
And we're going to end the poll in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
The moment of truth.
Okay, so Joan, do you want to
Yeah,
just share where we are?
So we can see some of you are still in crisis mode. It looks like the plurality of you have moved into monitoring, and some of you are beginning to think ahead, which is great. I think we're going to have something for all of you. So if we can close out the poll and move on to the next slide, we can talk about what happens in stage 1, crisis response. Oh, before that, sorry about that. I want to back up and tell us a little bit about how we thought about dynamic planning. And when we first started to examine it at Capacity Partners, we kept coming back to this organizational effectiveness chart that we've used for some time. And if you take a look at it, you can see that the context for your entire organization is really its culture. And I'm a real believer in that old phrase of culture comes from the top. I think that really says that right now you've got to be modeling calm, competent management for all of your staff. And one of the ways you can do that is to have a really strong plan that enables you to be on top of things and know what you're doing. And so I think dynamic planning really helps with that. If we move on to the components of your organization, it's safe to say we all exist to serve our mission, that really the core of our organization is our programs and our services that we provide to the community. However, we can't provide those services unless we take care of all the other components of the organization, our finances, our people. We have to do fundraising, we have to communicate and do marketing, and of course our systems, both the ones that are online and the ones we use our processes to get things done. The importance of each of these components may be higher or lower at any given moment, but we have to tend to all of them as we go through the planning process.
And I think just looking at this through the eyes of an executive director or even a CEO or COO, the pace that we've been working at is very quick, right? And so at one point in time for one day or a few days, the focus might be all on programs or all on fundraising and things are moving very quickly. But of course, it's our job to keep those things in balance and to feed and support our culture, make sure that our people are doing okay, make sure that we are checking in with our board, and of course, any stakeholders, constituents, clients that you have, partners. So I think it's, this is the balancing act for all of us, but if you don't kind of keep this in mind and at least have your dynamic plan touching each of those, you're likely to drop a ball, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, so building on our view of the organization, we're then tying this to the 4 stages. And we're suggesting that for each stage, you need a plan. And the plan is going to be based on your priorities and the key questions you need to ask. And then you'll be developing decisions which will be unique for each of you. So we're going to go through each stage in more detail.
Thank you. Okay, so stage 1 crisis response. A few of you are still there. Most of you have moved behind it. I'm sure moved beyond it. I'm sure if you have, you're happy to have it in your rearview mirror. But this is the point where you probably live by checklists, and your biggest concern was business continuity. How in the world were you going to get your workforce to work remotely? How are you going to serve your clients? How are you going to get your systems and processes to the cloud? And if they weren't there, how did you get them there? So it was really a time, and it really is a time of just day by day, moment by moment change and trying to deal with what's going on.
So then we're looking at stage 2, what we call the monitoring. And so this is not labeled as monitoring just to sit back and just keep a check on things. This is still an active engagement from you and your staff. And I will say that my staff has done a great job during this phase because they're closer to the work at identifying where we need to make adjustments. We had been sending out some quick e-blasts on a weekly basis, because there's so much information changing so quickly and we were providing so many new things. We're pulling back from that now to do every other week. Same with some of our trainings and programs that we're delivering. So it's a response that builds on things, and we're pulling back a little bit, but we're still working very quickly. And I will say too, during this monitoring phase, we were able to get perspective. Our annual fundraiser, our biggest fundraiser, was scheduled for today. It's our adult spelling bee. And when we first went into kind of the work at home phase, we had to just postpone that. And over the past couple weeks, I'd say 2 weeks, we've gotten to the stage where we're monitoring all our other changes, but we're just now able to build some plans to work to replace some of that fundraising revenue and engagement. It goes to our marketing, our communications, our people love it. And so we have just launched some plans, and we'll be announcing them next week for the month of May to be able to really build in that fundraiser again. So we were able enough to pause and get to a new equilibrium with our programming that we're able to think back on that major communications and major fundraising moment for us.
So yeah, Kathy, it sounds like you guys are really moving along very well. And I wanted to mention that sometimes this monitoring phase can require a different organizational structure. So I've been involved in 2 crisis situations, one not related to COVID-19, where a special group of 5 people, there were some board and some not board and some also staff, were appointed and given the authority to make decisions very quickly. That was unusual, but highly effective. In another case, a board that I'm involved with now, they have shifted the decision-making pattern. The chair and the executive director are meeting every week. Dashboards have been set up. The executive committee is meeting every 2 weeks. And then there's another group of people who are already starting the longer range planning. So consider whether your current organizational structure will work for you, or you may need something different. Now, stage 3, planning ahead, is where few of you are right now, and we understand that. Capacity Partners recommends that sooner rather than later, you move into stage 3. Why? if you get stuck in the monitoring stage, what's going to happen is you're not going to be ready to move out of it. For those of you who've been very hard hit, you need some altogether new strategies. For those of you who are moving back into pretty much the same situation, it's not so critical, but in all cases, we don't know what the current situation is going to be, which is why people say, well, how can we plan ahead? But the truth is that we need to put on our best thinking and project where we think, what we think will be happening externally in the next 6 to 12 months, and then start to base plans around those assumptions. So you want to look at the needs of your clients. Have they changed in light of COVID-19? Still, the competitive analysis, what are you best at? You want to stay true to your core. And when looking at your core, as well as the needs of your constituents, are your old services still the right ones? Or do you need to create some new services? And then do you have the fundraising and the marketing behind this? And do you need to make any changes in your organizational staffing? All of this is what we're calling a dynamic plan. You could say it's a mini strategic plan, which it is, but it's dynamic because one, it's short term. Two, you're going to have to do it more rapidly than with the full stakeholder outreach that you normally do. And three, you're still going to need the tools of monitoring as you move forward.
Thanks, Mary. You know, I'm on the board of an arts nonprofit, and we have 3 primary programs, and 2 of them are dead in the water. We have a gallery, which obviously is closed at the moment. We have another service where we provide J1 visas. Those are visas for visiting artists, and we do that for other arts organizations. As you can imagine, there's not much going on there, and there may not be anything going on there for some time to come. So the organization is really having to think about what's going to happen and how we're going to deal with this. While our staff is really dealing with the day-to-day, our executive director is working a bit with the board, but the board has been meeting regularly to talk about our future. And I think in part that's because I've been part of this process and know that we've got to do that in order to be prepared. It's a great place to get your board involved.
And we do realize that many of you sitting there are probably thinking, well, this is great. We can do this dynamic planning, but what are the solutions to these major organizational challenges we're facing? And we think they exist, and we can help you with those and would be glad to at any time.
Okay, so stage 4 transition. This is the moment we are all waiting for. And in our mind's eye, we're going to go back out to restaurants, and we're going to go back to concerts, and we're going to have things be just like they used to be. But the reality is a lot of the old is not going to come back anytime soon, and some things won't come back ever. And so we need to have used our stage 3 planning to think about how we're going to get there. Importantly, we need a very well thought out timeline that enables us to have an orderly transition back to the new normal. We need to think about what the workplace changes are going to be. If we've really done our planning well, as Mary said, in stage 3, we may have some program and process changes, and this is the time to think about how to implement them. And then really importantly, we need to monitor adherence to our plan, knowing that we may have to adjust things from time to time as things change or become more challenging at various times. Kathy, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. There are a couple things that I'm thinking about as we think ahead to transition, as we're going to be doing our new planning, our new dynamic plan. And some of those have to do with the fact that this is going to, transition's not just going to be a point A to point B transition, because there may be another surge. We may have to go back into a different kind of situation. So it's a rolling transition in my mind that we're planning for. And I think for one of the things that we hold very high in terms of how we do our work is what's success look like? How do we measure outcomes not only for our own organization, but for the organizations that we fund? We fund ESOL programs for adults. And so how do we help them support perhaps new ways to collect outcomes data, to evaluate learners who they're not in the classroom with, and how do we do evaluation of programs? Because of course we know that funders will be asking for this information from us, but we want to be prepared to be in dialogue with folks to figure out what are the best ways to collect outcomes data and identify success in a new and continuing changing type of environment.
Thank you, Kathy. So here are the 4 stages of dynamic planning. As we said, crisis, monitoring your response plan, planning ahead with your dynamic plan, and moving into transition. So this is the overview. We hope that this concept of dynamic planning will help you think about what stage you're in and how you can move to the next stage. And we thank you very much for joining us. At this time, I'm going to stop the share and we'll look at the Q&As and have a little bit more of a discussion. Okay, let's see.
So
Kathy,
Mary, there
can
is
you
a
read?
first,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a first question. I'll read it here. What is the, or how do we do this type of planning if we're a very small organization? How do we do this all if we're just a very small shop?
Well, that is a really great question. And let me just say that, you know, we recently did a project through the Community Foundation of Northern Fauquier and Loudoun counties that was a mini strategic planning exercise. So number one, we know it can be done. In this case, with your dynamic planning, instead of reaching out so extensively, we recommend that you gather a group of your board members. This is the time really to put your board into action and to more decisively make certain decisions. And then you can use your Zoom or other technology to gather input. So figuring out the key questions, getting a small group together, and then getting feedback and moving ahead. Yes, it can be done. Okay, so let's see some of the other questions that we have here. Well, we just had what is the role of the board and can that be done virtually? Joan, do you want to address that?
Well, for starters, I'm going to guess that at the very beginning of this, that you were talking to your board chair almost every day. And at this point, you're probably still talking to that person regularly, though perhaps not every day anymore. And you're communicating with your board as to what's going on regularly, but it's really when you get to stage 3, planning ahead, that the board becomes so critical. And as I said with my arts organization, we've been having online meetings. We started off doing them by telephone as conference calls, and that was really kind of difficult. And then we switched to Zoom, which we found is much more successful. And we've been meeting regularly, and the big topic is how are we going to move ahead? And we've broken into some smaller groups to do it and then come back together again.
So I would just add real quickly, and then I know we've got some other great questions. I am doing a lot of email updates to my board. There was one point very early on in the first week where I had to text my board chair on a Saturday night because our landlord had said there was a case of COVID in our building. So that was a different type of communication, but there are all different ways to keep that and do that regularly.
And quick political disclaimer here, I'm on Kathy's board at McHale. And we have been having fundraising calls with the fundraising committee, some of whom are board members that we've been meeting with. Another place to be board.
So I'm looking at all these questions that are coming in, and I want to make sure that we can answer all of your questions. Here's one. We communicate mostly through email. How do you create more dynamic communication? You mentioned dashboards. You know, as with everything in life, there are always silver linings. And one of the silver linings of this COVID-19 experience is that we have learned how to communicate with tools like Zoom, seeing each other, talking to each other. Can I just talk about Capacity Partners? We're a group of 16 consultants. We now have formed teams. our teams are able to work together in a way that they were not before because everybody lived in different places. It was kind of a hassle to drive in. That's true for your board. So your board is actually able to meet more frequently, shorter periods of time, more productively. So we would strongly encourage that. Number two, we have started using a tool called Slack, which is very similar to Teams in Microsoft. And that allows you a quick conversation, gathering all materials there. That's another tool. As far as the dashboard, I think the dashboard of some sort is critical so that you can monitor your progress in the key areas that are going to help you survive and thrive. Anybody else have more to say on that?
Yeah, but I do just want to mention we've got another question about a young organization handling this type of planning. So maybe we should just go quickly to that. And I think the question is, you know, we're a young enough organization that we haven't done strategic planning yet. So do we start with dynamic planning? Do we get a strategic plan first? What's the advice on that? That's a great question and a tough one.
Yeah, so, you know, to be fair, this dynamic planning that we're talking about is the same elements done in a different kind of a process. If you're a young organization, you do need to be very clear on your mission and vision. I mean, the long-term vision of what you're here hoping to accomplish. I would suggest that you turn to the dynamic planning, however, in terms of setting your 6 to 12-month goals. And we have developed a dynamic planning tool, which we'll be sharing with any of you who want it. And that is going to lay out in more detail how you can go about doing the dynamic planning. And also, whoever asked that question, we'll be glad to hop on the phone and talk to you about that. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Did I say Slack is a tool? I meant Slack. Let's see, any other questions that we have?
Mary, there was one about what happens if you're in financially god-awful situation. And maybe that leads to a conversation some of us were having the other day about mergers at a time like this. You know, my prior role was as the grants manager for the Montgomery County Council. And speaking with some of my colleagues, we often felt like in some instances we had way too many nonprofits competing with each other to provide the same services, and that there was really an opportunity for organizations to come together and actually become far more powerful in what they did. If you might fit into this category and things are really pretty bad, it is a great time to start talking to your colleagues and think about how you might survive together as opposed to individually. So I would think that is a valid option.
So here's another question that's come in. How do you help your board and not overwhelm them? Well, you know, that's a very good question. However, honestly, board members often really want to help and don't know what to do. And I could even say so Capacity Partners, we do fundraising, board development, leadership coaching, as well as dynamic planning and strategic planning. Yet when I've been on a board and I've been told go fundraise, I don't know what to do. I need more guidance. So I think the key thing here for those of you who are executive directors is to get very clear, specific, and ask your board to do specific tasks. And my guess is that they will respond.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, I completely agree. You know your board, you know what strengths they have, you know what their availability is right now. I have a board member who works very high up at one of the local hospitals. Her availability is just a little bit less right now because of what they're doing on the front lines. But I have several other board members who I'm able to make very specific asks of in very specific areas and get the support that we need.
And very quickly, I was on a couple of calls in the last couple of nights with people talking about what they'd been doing. And those of us who are on boards and were called to ask were feeling like we were actually doing things to contribute. And people who weren't in that situation were feeling a lot more lonely and unhappy. So I think that boards will actually respond quite well now.
Okay, so I've been given the word that our time is up, and I just want to leave this conversation on a positive note. You know, we are facing tremendous challenges, but what we've all learned is that what we want most is to connect. And they're having a difficult time keeping us from connecting, whether it's on the beaches or on the streets or even via these video. That's what we're all about as human beings. And that's what we're about in the nonprofit community, connecting resources and people to causes that we believe in and to people who are in need. So for Capacity Partners, that is also why we exist, and that is to connect with you and to provide services. So we'd like to get your feedback, and we've got a poll. We're offering various services. We've got 1 free hour of consulting, absolutely no obligation to anybody who wants it. We also, if you want, we can contact you, let us know, and we'll talk to you about dynamic planning. We've put together a list of special services for COVID-19. Let me give you an example of one. This came from one of our Coffee with Capacity Partners chats. Somebody said, I'd love to be able to just send you our donor letters and have you read it and respond, do we have the right tone? It's a very easy, very quick service. We're going to be providing things like that. And of course, if all you want are our slides, we'll be glad to send those. If you have other ideas, please put them in your Q&A or your chat, because we really want to gather your ideas so that we can continue to be a service. Kathy, Joan, do you have anything you want to add in closing?
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we hope you have a wonderful day.